The yellowed envelope trembled in William Parker's wrinkled hands as he stared at the faded address written in childish handwriting. After 35 years working at the Duluth, Minnesota post office, this wasn't just another piece of misplaced mail, it was a ghost from the past that refused to rest. "Dear Sir or Madam, my mother is very ill and needs help. Please help." The simple words written in pencil that had almost been erased by time made the veteran letter carrier's heart squeeze. The signature at the end of the letter, Joey. Bennett, 8 years old, and the date 1983 made the piece of paper even more disturbing. William found the letter during the demolition of the old post office on Superior Avenue, a building that had served the community for over 70 years. Among the rubble of a collapsed wall, a metal box revealed dozens of undelivered pieces of mail, mostly old advertisements and bills. But this particular letter hidden at the bottom of the box was different. "This can't wait another day," William muttered to himself carefully, tucking the envelope into the inside pocket of his uniform. After his shift, he drove to the Duluth Public Library, determined to find out what happened to Joey Bennett and his mother. Librarian Rachel Martinez, a woman in her 40s with piercing eyes behind red-framed glasses, didn't take long to take an interest in the case. "Let me check the Herald's digitized archives," she offered, her nimble fingers dancing over the keyboard. The monitor displayed a headline from 1983 that made William feel as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Death of Margaret Bennett raises questions about practices at St. Mary's Hospital." The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile standing next to a boy with a serious expression. "My God," whispered Rachel, quickly reading the article. "Margaret Bennett died after being repeatedly refused treatment for a heart condition. The hospital claimed a shortage of places, but witnesses said that patients with premium health plans were given priority." William felt the weight of the letter in his pocket increase. "And the boy?" "Joey was sent to live with his grandparents in Milwaukee," Rachel replied, continuing her research. "But that's not all. There were a number of suspicious deaths at St. Mary's during that period. All of them involved patients with basic or no health insurance." That night William couldn't sleep. The words of Joey's letter echoed in his mind, along with the images from the newspaper archive. The next morning, he decided that he needed to do more than just deliver a late letter. He needed to find out the truth. With Rachel's help, William began to map out a disturbing pattern. Between 1980 and 1985, St. Mary's Hospital recorded an unusually high number of deaths among low-income patients. Dr. Marcus Reynolds, then director of the hospital, implemented a system of resource optimization, which in practice meant denying or delaying treatments for patients with basic plans. "We need to find Joey Bennett," declared William, spreading out documents on the library table. Rachel nodded, already typing on her computer. "If we can prove that there was a systematic scheme of negligence, we can reopen not only his mother's case but all the others." The search for Joey led them to discover that he had become a lawyer in Minneapolis, specializing in medical malpractice cases. "Maybe it's not a coincidence," remarked Rachel, showing the page of the law firm where Joey worked. William decided to make a call that would change everything. With his hands shaking slightly, he dialed the number for Bennett and Associates. "Hello, this is William Parker from the Duluth Post Office. I need to speak to Mr. Bennett about a letter he wrote in 1983. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "A letter." Joey Bennett's voice, now a man of 48, sounded controlled, but William could detect a note of restrained emotion. "Yes, sir. A letter asking for help for your mother. It was found during the demolition of the old post office. And Mr. Bennett, I think we've discovered something much bigger than a piece of misplaced mail." The silence that followed was deafening. When Joey finally spoke, his voice was choked. "I never knew who I sent that letter to. I just took a random address from the phone book. I was a desperate child trying to save my mother. Mr. Bennett, I believe your mother was not the only victim. We have evidence of a systematic scam at St. Mary's Hospital during the 80s, if you can help us." "I'll be in Duluth tomorrow," Joey interrupted, his voice now firm and determined. I've spent decades trying to prove that there was something wrong with my mother's death. Maybe this letter is the missing piece." William hung up the phone and looked at Rachel, who had been listening to the whole conversation. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes," replied William, holding up the letter he had kept in his pocket for so long. "And this time we're going to make sure that every voice is heard." Joey Bennett parked his black BMW in front of the Duluth Public Library on a chilly October morning. Through the fogged glass he observed the red brick building where, 40 years ago, he used to hide among the shelves of children's books while his mother was undergoing treatment at St. Mary's Hospital. William Parker and Rachel Martinez were waiting for him at the entrance. The letter carrier held the yellowed letter as if it were a holy relic, and in a way it represented a desperate boy's last cry for help. "Mr. Bennett," William held out his hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Joey, now a tall man with broad shoulders and gray hair at his temples, shook the offered hand. "Please call me Joey. I've spent the last 2 decades trying to prove that there was something wrong with my mother's death. This letter could be the key that was missing." Rachel led them to a private study room at the back of the library. The walls were lined with newspaper clippings and documents, organized chronologically. "We started mapping all the suspicious deaths at St. Mary's between 1980 and 1985, she explained, pointing to a detailed timeline. Joey approached the mural, his eyes fixed on one photo in particular, his mother, Margaret Bennett, smiling at the camera during a picnic in Leif Erikson Park. "She was only 32, he muttered. "The doctors said that her heart problem wasn't urgent, that she needed to wait her turn. But patients who arrived after her with better health plans were seen immediately." William pulled out a worn file from his briefcase. "We found records of a nurse called Patricia Winters who worked at St. Mary's during that period. She tried to report the hospital's discriminatory practices, but was fired for insubordination a week later." Patricia Winters. Joey frowned, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "She used to bring me mint candies while I waited for my mother at my appointments. After Mom died, I never saw her again." Rachel typed quickly on her laptop. "Patricia still lives in Duluth. She retired 5 years ago from St. Luke's Medical Center. I have her address here. We need to talk to her." Joey declared, his voice carrying the weight of decades of unanswered questions. "If she witnessed what was going on—" "There's more," William interrupted, spreading more documents out on the table. "We found a pattern in the hospital's financial records. Dr. Marcus Reynolds implemented a scoring system for prioritizing patients. On the surface it appeared to be based on medical urgency, but the numbers don't lie. There was a direct correlation with the value of the health plans." Joey picked up one of the documents, his fingers trembling slightly. "This explains why Mom kept getting pushed to the back of the queue even when her symptoms got worse. They literally put a price on her life." Rachel pointed to a series of obituaries. "We identified at least 73 cases similar to your mother's in the same period. People with treatable conditions who died waiting for proper care." "73 families," Joey whispered, wiping his hand across his face. "73 children who, like me, lost their parents because of the greed of a few." William placed Joey's letter on the table. "Your mother wasn't the first victim, but we can make her the last to be denied justice. The statute of limitations may have expired for criminal cases, but we can still expose the truth. And there's one more thing," Rachel added, turning her laptop to show a recent article. "Dr. Reynolds is about to receive an award for medical excellence from the State Board of Health. The ceremony is in 2 weeks here in Duluth." Joey stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "He's getting an award after all he's done." His voice shook with a mixture of anger and incredulity. "Not if we can help it," William replied firmly. "But we need to act fast and be thorough. An accusation of this magnitude needs to be irrefutable." "We could start with Patricia Winters," Rachel suggested, "if she's kept any documentation from the time—" Joey nodded, regaining his professional composure. "I'll need copies of all that." and we need to locate other affected families. The more voices we have, the harder it will be to ignore the truth." William watched as Joey examined each document with the trained eyes of a lawyer. The frightened boy who had written that desperate letter had turned into a man determined to fight for justice. "There's one thing that still puzzles me," Joey said, holding up his old letter. "Who did I really address this to? Did you mention the Sullivans?" Rachel consulted her notes. "Yes, the letter was addressed to 1247 East Superior Street. At the time, the residence belonged to Robert and Mary Sullivan." "The Sullivans—" Joey closed his eyes, trying to remember. "I think I saw their name in the phone book. Are they still alive?" "Mary died 10 years ago," William replied. "But Robert still lives in the same house. He's 85 now." "I need to talk to him," Joey decided. Even if the letter never arrived, he deserves to know that his house was chosen by a desperate boy, as a last resort of hope. The three of them agreed to meet the next morning to visit Patricia Winters. As Joey prepared to leave, William noticed that he had carefully tucked the letter into his inside jacket pocket, just as the letter carrier had done the day before. "Mr. Bennett," William called out as Joey reached the door. "I'm sorry, we didn't find that letter 40 years ago. Perhaps—" "William," Joey interrupted gently, "perhaps the right time for that letter to be found is now, when I can finally do something about it." Patricia Winters lived in a modest wooden house in the residential area of Duluth with a small herb garden in the front yard. When Joey, William, and Rachel arrived the next morning, they found the former nurse watering her plants, as if she were trying to nurture the memories she had tried to bury for so many years. "I knew that one day someone would ask these questions," said Patricia, pouring chamomile tea in the living room full of family photographs. Her blue eyes, still sharp at 72, studied Joey with a mixture of recognition and regret. "You have her eyes, you know. Margaret's, always so determined." Joey held his cup tightly, trying to control his emotion. "Mrs. Winters, we need to know all about Dr. Reynolds's prioritization system. About how my mother and dozens of others were murdered," Patricia added, her voice firm. "Let's call it by its right name. What happened in that hospital was institutionalized murder, disguised as efficient resource management." She stood up and walked over to an old chest in the corner of the room. "And I have proof." William and Rachel exchanged hopeful glances as Patricia removed a metal box from the trunk. "I've kept copies of everything," she explained. "Attendance schedules, records of treatment denials, internal memos about optimizing resources. When they fired me, I managed to make copies before they destroyed the originals." The documents revealed a meticulously crafted system. Patients were classified into categories from A to D, not based on the severity of their conditions, but on the value of their health insurance. Margaret Bennett, with her basic state plan, was in Category D. "Your mother should have received immediate heart surgery," Patricia told Joey, her voice shaking. "But there was always a more urgent patient with a premium plan. I tried to alert the administration, the local press, even the state medical board. No one would listen." Rachel began methodically photographing each document while William took detailed notes. Joey remained silent, absorbing every word, every piece of evidence that confirmed what his childish heart had always known: his mother could have been saved. "There's something else," Patricia continued, taking out a small diary from the box. "I kept a record of every patient we lost because of this system. Names, dates, medical conditions, how long they waited for treatment. Some families didn't even know that their loved ones were being deliberately neglected." Joey flipped through the diary, recognizing some of the names from the obituaries Rachel had found. "Why did you keep all this for so long?" Patricia smiled sadly. "Because I promised your mother the last time I saw her that one day the truth would come out. Margaret knew she was dying. She knew the hospital was denying her the treatment she needed. Her last concern was you, Joey. She made me promise to keep the evidence until you were ready to use it." The revelation hit Joey like a punch in the gut. His mother had foreseen all this, had ensured that the truth would survive until he could fight for justice. "There's one more thing you need to see," Patricia said, getting up with difficulty. She led them down to the basement where an entire wall was covered in newspaper clippings and photographs. "I continued to follow Dr. Reynolds after I left the hospital. He didn't stop at St. Mary's. He implemented similar systems in 3 other hospitals throughout the 1990s. William examined the most recent clippings. "And now he's going to receive an award for innovation in hospital management." "The award ceremony," Rachel murmured, an idea forming. "It'll be a public event with press. If we can lay it all out, then—" "No." Joey interrupted, his eyes fixed on a photograph of his mother on Patricia's wall. "Let's not just expose it. We're going to do it legally, methodically. I'm going to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the families. Every death, every life lost will have its day in court." Patricia nodded approvingly. "I have contacts with some of the families. I've stayed connected over the years waiting for this moment. I can help locate them. And I can use my contacts at the post office to trace those who have moved away," William offered. "The library has access to genealogical records and public databases," Rachel added. "We can find them all." Joey looked at the group gathered in the basement, each offering their unique skills to unearth a long-buried truth. "My mother believed this day would come," he said, his voice breaking. "She made sure we had all the pieces we needed. Now let's honor her memory, and that of all the others we've lost." As they climbed the basement stairs, Patricia held Joey's arm gently. "There's one more person you need to meet," she said. "Robert Sullivan. He was a member of the hospital's board of directors at the time. He resigned in protest at Reynolds' policies, but was forced to sign a confidentiality agreement." "The same Robert Sullivan I sent the letter to?" Joey asked, surprised. Patricia smiled mysteriously. "The universe has an interesting way of connecting the dots, doesn't it? Maybe it wasn't by chance that you chose that address from the phone book." The Sullivan house remained practically unchanged since 1983, with its Victorian windows and white paint peeling off the edges. Joey, William, and Rachel watched from the sidewalk as Patricia Winters rang the doorbell. The sound echoed like a call from the past. Robert Sullivan welcomed them with the quiet dignity of a man who has carried a heavy secret for decades. His blue-gray eyes, framed by deep wrinkles, stared first at the letter Joey was holding and then at the lawyer's face. "So you're the boy in the letter," said Robert, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I always wondered if you'd turn up one day." The revelation took everyone by surprise. Joey stepped forward. "Did you know about the letter?" Robert gestured for them to enter. The living room was a living museum of the 1980s, with meticulously preserved antique furniture and yellowed photographs on the walls. In one of them, Joey recognized a younger Robert Sullivan in a suit in front of St. Mary's Hospital. "Patricia told me about the letter in 1983, Robert explained, taking a seat in his favorite armchair. "At the time, I was the only member of the board who opposed Dr. Reynolds' policies. When I heard that a boy had written asking for help, I tried to locate his family, but Reynolds had already implemented his system," Patricia added, taking a seat next to Robert. "Margaret Bennett was already at the bottom of the list." Joey felt the weight of the story piling up on his shoulders. "Why didn't you ever report it?" Robert stood up with difficulty and walked to an adjoining office. "Because they silenced me with this," he said, handing the document to Joey. "A confidentiality agreement shielded with threats not only against me but against my entire family." William and Rachel approached as Joey examined the document. It was an elaborate contract that not only prevented Robert from talking about the hospital's practices, but also included clauses about possible adverse consequences for his family members. Reynolds had powerful connections, Robert continued. Politicians, judges, insurance company executives. The system he created wasn't just about hospital profit. It was part of a much larger network of corruption in the healthcare system. "And now they want to reward him," Rachel commented, her voice charged with indignation. "It's not just an award," Robert revealed, leaning forward. It's a validation of his system. After the ceremony, Reynolds plans to publish a book detailing his efficient management model. Other hospitals have already shown interest in implementing it. Joey felt his stomach turn. They're going to turn murder into methodology. Unless we stop it, William interjected. With Patricia's documents, Mr. Sullivan's testimony, and the evidence we've gathered, it won't be enough, Robert interrupted, standing up again. We need something more. Something that not even Reynolds can deny or cover up. He walked over to a painting on the wall and removed it, revealing a built-in safe. Robert, Patricia whispered. You didn't. I kept copies of everything, he said, turning the disc in the safe. Every memo, every email, every board decision. And most importantly, recordings of the meetings where Reynolds explained his system in detail. The safe opened with a metallic click, revealing dozens of cassette tapes and documents organized chronologically. For 40 years, I've carried the weight of not having done more to save people like your mother, Joey. Maybe now is my chance to do the right thing. Joey examined one of the tapes. On the label, a date, 15/03/1983, 3 days before his mother's death. Do you have a device to play this back? Robert nodded and pulled an old tape recorder out of a drawer. Dr. Reynolds' voice filled the room, cold and calculating. The system is simple, gentlemen. Category A, patients receive absolute priority. Categories B and C according to availability. Category D, well, they should be grateful for any care they receive. Rachel covered her mouth with her hands in horror. William clenched his fists tightly. Patricia cried silently. There's more, Robert continued. Reynolds kept a parallel record. Each economically advantageous death resulted in a bonus for the administration. His mother, Joey, her death was worth a 15% raise for 5 executives. Joey felt the blood boil in his veins, but years of experience as a lawyer helped him keep control. We need to act strategically. If we just expose it, they'll try to discredit the evidence, claim it's a forgery. So what's the plan? William asked. We're going to use their own system against them. Joey replied, a plan forming in his mind. Mr. Sullivan, do you still have contacts on the current hospital board? Robert nodded. Some of the newer members are decent people. They just don't know the real story. Good. Patricia, how many of the affected families can you contact between now and the award ceremony? With help, maybe 30 or 40, she replied. Rachel, we need your research expertise to connect the dots, follow the money find. Patterns in the other hospitals where Reynolds has implemented his system. I'm already on it, Rachel replied, typing rapidly on her tablet. And you, William? Your discovery of the letter was the catalyst for all of this. We need to document every step, create an irrefutable timeline. William smiled. I've kept every piece of evidence since I found your letter. Joey looked at the assembled group, each representing a crucial piece of the puzzle that his mother and so many others had paid with their lives to expose. The awards ceremony is in 10 days. We have to work fast, be precise, and above all, make sure that this time the truth can't be buried. 40 years is long enough to keep a secret, Robert declared, his voice firm for the first time that afternoon. It's time to break the silence. The 10 days leading up to Dr. Reynolds' award ceremony were a race against time. In the basement of Robert Sullivan's house, transformed into an operations center, Joey Bennett and his makeshift team worked tirelessly, connecting decades of injustice into an irrefutable web of evidence. Rachel Martinez had created an impressive digital map on the wall, connecting dots between the deaths at St. Mary's and Reynolds' subsequent administrative successes at other hospitals. Each red line represented a life lost. Each blue line a financial bonus received by the administration. I've managed to contact 37 families, Patricia announced one particularly tense afternoon, placing a new stack of affidavits on the table. Each one has a similar story. Treatments, denied diagnoses, ignored deaths that could have been avoided. William, who had taken time off work at the post office to devote himself fully to the case, was methodically organizing the transcripts of Robert's tapes. "The pattern is frightening," he observed. "Reynolds didn't just create a system of discrimination, he refined it over the years." Joey studied each document with the keen eye of 2 decades of experience in law. His desk was covered. In notes, highlighted passages and connections that would turn a personal tragedy into a landmark court case. "We need more than just exposing the truth," he said, running a hand through his gray hair. "We need to ensure that the entire system is dismantled." Robert Sullivan, who had found new strength in his purpose of redemption, handled a sealed envelope. "Maybe this will help," he said, handing the envelope to Joey. "It's my letter of resignation from the board dated 1983, detailing exactly why I was leaving. I never sent it because of the confidentiality agreement, but I kept it as proof." The letter revealed not only Reynolds' system, but also the names of everyone involved in its implementation, including politicians and insurance company executives who were still in positions of power. "That's dynamite," muttered Rachel, scanning the document. "But it also makes us bigger targets." "We're already targets," Patricia replied, her voice laden with decades of guilt and determination. "From the moment we decided not to stay silent, the team received the first sign that they were messing with powerful forces when William found his car with flat tires the next day. Then Rachel noticed someone following her on the way home. Patricia started receiving anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night. "They're nervous," observed Joey, installing additional security cameras in Robert's house. "They know something is coming, but they don't know exactly what." 2 days before the ceremony, the plan began to take final shape. Joey had prepared not only a comprehensive lawsuit, but also an almost 200-page document detailing every death, every administrative decision, every penny earned from the suffering of others. "The ceremony will be broadcast live," Rachel said, showing the event's website. "Reynolds will receive the award from the governor." "Perfect," said Joey, a determined glint in his eyes. "The bigger the audience, the better." The day before the ceremony, the 37 families located by Patricia gathered in the community hall of the local church. Joey watched as people who had never met shared painfully. Similar stories: fathers, mothers, children and siblings lost to a system that considered them disposable. "Tomorrow," Joey told the group, his voice echoing in the silent hall, "we won't just be exposing a criminal. We'll be honoring the memory of our loved ones and making sure that no other family goes through what we went through." That night, alone in his hotel room, Joey reread the letter he had written 40 years earlier. The childish words asking for help to save his mother now carried the weight of a prophecy fulfilled. Help didn't arrive in time for Margaret Bennett, but it would for countless others. "We did it, Mom," he whispered, tucking the letter into the pocket of the jacket he would wear the next day. "The system that took you away from me is about to fall." On the morning of the ceremony, the team met one last time at Robert's house. William brought everyone coffee. Rachel checked the latest updates on her laptop. Patricia organized the families that were starting to arrive, and Robert adjusted his tie in the mirror, his first public appearance in years. "Does everyone know their roles?" asked Joey, observing the group that had become his family over the last 2 weeks. "Perfectly," replied William, holding up the folder with the original evidence. "All the families are in place," confirmed Patricia. "The document is already in the hands of 5 different journalists," added Rachel. "And I'm ready to break 4 decades of silence," declared Robert, his voice firm. Joey looked at each of them, feeling the weight of the moment. "Then let's make history. It's time to show Dr. Reynolds that some truths can't be rewarded, they need to be exposed." The event hall at the Radisson Hotel in Duluth was filled with prominent figures from the medical community. Under the crystal chandeliers, Dr. Marcus. Reynolds, at 75, adjusted his acceptance speech with hands that never shook as he signed death warrants disguised as medical protocols. Joey Bennett watched from the back row, surrounded by his unlikely team of vigilantes. William Parker held tightly to his old post office briefcase, now carrying much more than overdue correspondence. Rachel Martinez typed discreetly on her tablet, coordinating the families strategically positioned around the hall. Patricia Winters and Robert Sullivan sat rigidly, each carrying 4 decades of silenced truths. The governor took the stage, his voice reverberating through the speakers. Today we honor a true pioneer of modern hospital management, Dr. Marcus. Reynolds revolutionized the healthcare system with his innovative approach. Joey felt the weight of the 1983 letter in his pocket, as if the desperate words of the boy who went were burning through the paper. He watched as Reynolds walked towards the stage, applauded by an audience that was unaware of the true cost of his success. "Now," whispered Joey. Like a perfectly rehearsed choreography, 37 people stood up simultaneously, each holding a framed photograph. Margaret Bennett, James Cooper, Susan Martinez, Michael O'Brien. The faces of the dead stared at Reynolds from every angle of the room. The governor hesitated in the middle of his speech, noticing the change in atmosphere. Reynolds froze on the steps of the stage, his aged face losing color, as he recognized some of the faces in the photographs. Joey stood up, his clear, firm voice cutting through the tense silence. "Dr. Reynolds, before you receive your award for innovation in hospital management, I believe that these people deserve to be recognized. After all, their deaths have funded your success." Murmurs ran through the hall as William and Rachel quickly distributed copies of the document compiled by Joey to the press present. Patricia Winters stood up, her hands shaking but her voice firm. "As a nurse at St. Mary's, I witnessed people die while Dr. Reynolds calculated the value of their lives based on their health plans." Reynolds tried to reach for the microphone, but Robert Sullivan was quicker. "As a former member of the board of directors, I confirm every word. I have the recordings of the meetings where Dr. Reynolds explained his optimization system, an elegant euphemism for systematic murder." Chaos ensued in the hall. Journalists were firing questions. Cameras were flashing. Security guards were moving around, uncertain of how to proceed. The governor stared in horror at the pages of the document in his hands. "This is absurd," thundered Reynolds, finally reaching for the microphone. "These accusations are—" "True," interrupted a voice from the back of the room. An elderly man stood up, leaning on a cane. "I was the financial administrator at St. Mary's in 1983. I signed the bonus checks, every economically advantageous. Death." More people began to speak up, former hospital employees, relatives of victims, retired nurses, each one adding their piece to the mosaic of horror that Reynolds had constructed. Joey walked slowly to the stage, staring at the man who had turned his mother's death into a line item on a profit sheet. Dr. Reynolds, in 1983, an 8-year-old boy, wrote a desperate letter asking for help to save his mother. That boy grew up to become a lawyer specializing in medical malpractice cases, always seeking justice. Today he is ready to present not only evidence of her crimes, but also a class action representing hundreds of families. Reynolds tried to keep his composure, but decades of arrogance were beginning to crumble. "You have no idea of the financial pressures a hospital faces. Difficult decisions have to be made." "Difficult decisions," Patricia snapped. "How do you decide that Margaret Bennett was worth less than other patients because her health insurance was basic? How do you calculate the value of a human life in dollars and cents?" William Parker held up Joey's old letter. This letter never reached its destination in 1983, but today it finally fulfills its purpose. It's the first piece of evidence in a case that will expose decades of crimes masquerading as administrative policy. Rachel projected a detailed presentation onto the event's main screen graphs, showing the correlation between deaths and profit. Increases incriminating emails, manipulated financial records. The truth in all its brutal clarity. Reynolds tried to leave the stage but found himself surrounded by families who had waited decades for this moment. The governor, realizing the gravity of the situation, gestured to his aides. "Dr. Reynolds," he announced, "in light of these accusations, the ceremony is suspended, and I will personally ensure a full investigation into these allegations." Joey watched as Reynolds was escorted out of the hall, no longer the celebrated hospital administrator, but a man broken by the weight of his own actions. Families embraced, some crying, others simply holding the photographs of their loved ones with a new sense of peace. Robert Sullivan approached Joey, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your mother would be proud." "This is just the beginning," Joey replied, watching the journalists already live-streaming the story that would rock the American healthcare system. "Now we need to make sure that the system that allowed this is completely reformed." William, Rachel, and Patricia joined them, forming a silent victory circle. The 1983 letter, which had waited patiently for 4 decades, had finally delivered its message, not just to the Sullivans, its original destination, but to an entire country that needed to wake up to a painful truth about the value of human life. "Some letters," William said softly, "take longer to reach their destination, but when they do, they change everything." Joey touched the envelope in his pocket one last time, feeling that he could finally let the 8-year-old boy rest. His mother had received justice, and with her hundreds of other victims of a system that had put profit before life. The sun set over Duluth that evening, but for the first time in 40 years, the shadows of St. Mary's Hospital didn't seem so dark. The truth, finally free, was beginning to illuminate the darkest corners of American medicine, promising a tomorrow where no child would have to write a desperate letter asking for help to save their mother.